Today we're going to cover this is our fourth seminar of five, right? And today we're going to cover our founding documents. The first one that we did was on America's history with the emphasis on his story. Talked about how God has always been part of our history. The second one we did was on the miracles that have been documented in the history of this country. The third one we did was on the faith of our founders. We looked at the faith of our founders and realized that they're not all a bunch of agnostics and deists. Today we're looking at our founding documents, and next month will be the last in our series of these seminars. So in June we'll cover biblical principles for good government. So I encourage you guys to continue and to be equipped, because the Bible says without our people perish for a lack of knowledge. So we don't want to be those. Okay. All right. So today we're going to look at some of our founding documents, and this is just a rough timeline of them. There are actually other founding documents that we could look at, but these were the ones that are kind of official. I was thinking about other ones that kind of supplement them, but I thought this would be enough for us at this point. We're gonna start at the year 1215. That's before America, but you're gonna see
Randy was around.
Randy was around then, right? Yeah, okay. Then we're gonna look at in 1620 the Mayflower Compact. Then we're gonna go to 1776, our Declaration of Independence. We're gonna look at the Articles of Confederation. Then we're gonna look at the Northwest Ordinance. Anybody ever hear of the Northwest Ordinance?
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
I don't remember.
Okay. All right, yeah, we're gonna look at that. Then we're gonna look at the U.S. Constitution, and then we're gonna end with the Bill of Rights. And like I said, I was thinking about doing things with the Federalist Papers and everything, but I said that gets too crazy. Because this is only going to be a cursory, a brief overview of all our founding documents. If you remember, I don't know how many of you got here, we spent the whole year studying the Constitution a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Really?
Remember that? We spent a whole year studying it. So you could really, in the brief time that we have today, all that we can do is really just a brief overview of our founding documents. So, all right, so let's begin with the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta was basically in the year 1215. Now, the reason why we look at this is because the founding principles that our founding fathers came up with, they actually started back in 1215. What happened there is that the King of England, he was ruthless. He was a bad dude. He was overtaxing the people, overdoing everything. He was not a good king. So what happened, the barons and the princes around him had enough. And they said, King, we're not taking it anymore.
Amen.
All right? They said, we're not taking it anymore. So they literally rebelled against the king there. I don't know what I put there, but anyway. So they surrounded London, and they were going to siege London. And then so they said, listen, either you comply or we do you in. So he was forced to sign an agreement called the Magna Carta, which means Great Charter. Magna, like MAGA, we all know about MAGA country, right? Well, that was the Magna Carta, the Great Charter. And in that charter, let me just kind of go through, I don't want to skip stuff. I was going to read this. In 1215, thanks to years of unsuccessful foreign policies and heavy taxation, the man, England's King John, was facing down a possible rebellion by the country's powerful barons. Under duress, he agreed to a charter of liberties known as the Magna Carta, or Great Charter, that would place him in all of England's future.
Future sovereign.
Was reissued. All England's future sovereigns within the rule of law. Though it was not initially successful, the document was reissued with alterations in 1216, 1217, and 1225. So in the beginning, it didn't work, but they kept working on it. They didn't give up on it. They kept working on it. And right, we talked about God's ways are commit, submit, and don't quit. That's what they did. and they eventually served as the foundation for the English system of common law. Later generations of Englishmen would celebrate the Magna Carta as a symbol of freedom from oppression, as would the founding fathers of the United States of America, who in 1776 looked to the Charter as a historical precedent for asserting their liberty from the English crown. Now, we don't realize in our culture, we're so separated from that, but back in the day, back then, before there was any kind of written charters or anything, they basically operated by the rule they called a lex rex. Lex is the law, and rex is the king. In other words, the law is the king. Whatever the king says is the law. So they operated by lex rex, whatever the king, and if they switched kings, laws changed. Whatever the king wanted, that's what the laws were. This was the first time that they actually put down on a piece of paper standard rules and laws that other kings would have to abide by. Because again, back then, the idea was that the king was the sovereign. And the king heard from God. And whatever the king said, that's what God's will was. So they, at this point, and then you go into the Reformation and all that stuff where the people realize that the king isn't God. So they even at this point, they put down the charter to really put down rules and regulations that would stand for whoever was king. These are certain rules that they would have to adhere to. So what did the Magna Carta do? Written in Latin, the Magna Carta, Great Charter, was effectively the first written constitution in European history. Of its 63 clauses, many concerned the various property rights of barons and other powerful citizens, suggesting the limited intentions of the framers. The benefits of the charter were for centuries reserved for only the elite classes, while the majority of English citizens still lacked a voice in the government. In other words, this only had to deal with the noblemen, didn't have to do with the peasants. The peasants still had to do whatever their bosses told them to do. They were still peasants, so this only had to do with that. In the 17th century, however, two defining acts of English legislation, the Petition of Rights in 1628 and Habeas Corpus 1679. Now understand, now this is after the Reformation. Refer to clause 39, which states that no free man shall be imprisoned or dispossessed, except by the lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land. And clause 40, no one will sell, no one will deny or delay the right of justice. Also had a dramatic implication for future legal systems in Britain and America. See, before then, whatever the king said, that was it. But now this was setting certain laws that every king had to abide to. In 1776, rebellious American colonists looked to the Magna Carta as a model for their demands of liberty from the English crown on the eve of the American Revolution. Its legacy is especially evident in the Bill of Rights and the U.S. Constitution, and nowhere more so than in the Fifth Amendment, said, "No shall any person be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law," which echoes clause 39. Many state constitutions also include habeas ideas and phrases that can be traced directly to the historic document. That's basically habeas corpus there at that point. Right, so this was the first basic charter in world history that actually put down a set of constant laws and principles that came from the idea of natural rights. Natural rights is the idea that our rights come from God, and God gave us certain natural rights that no king and no government can take away. So that's what this great charter was all about. It kind of set the precedent that the king is not God. Only God is God. And the king has to rule in ways that are consistent with the rule of God. This was the first time in world history that there was such a thing. Before that, it was whoever was in power, you had at his mercy. Okay? Magna Carta. Any questions on that? Yes, sir.
Habeas corpus, is that what it says there? No free man shall be in prison? That
Yeah.
was the meaning of? Okay.
Yeah. It means due process.
Due process.
Nobody can be locked up just
Right.
because the king don't like you.
Yeah.
All right? Before that, you could be locked up if the king didn't like you. Right? Which is what they're trying to do now. in DC. Okay, with things like with Giuliani and stuff like that, all of a sudden, that's a whole other issue, okay? All right, but yep, that's what habeas corpus is, all right, okay. So moving right along, we're gonna cover a lot of the documents in the first session, because I wanna spend more time on the Constitution and the Declaration this afternoon as well, so, all right. Mayflower Compact, we're moving now to 1620, all right, so by now, England is developing, Western culture is developing, we're now in the time of the Reformation, and progress starts to happen. Understand this, the reason why we have civilization today is because of the Bible, right? Before the Bible, we talk about the Dark Ages, all right? People knew about the Dark Ages, but it wasn't until the Martin Luther and the Gutenberg printing press started reproducing the Bible, and then started putting the Bible in people's hands. Because before then, the only ones who had the Bible was the Pope and the priests, and the other people weren't allowed to read the Bible. All right, you know, I grew up as a Catholic where you didn't read the Bible. Okay, that was the old thing, because back then the religious leaders, they wanted to maintain control. So the way they maintained control was they were the ones that read the Bible, and they interpreted to you what it meant to you. Now all of a sudden the Gutenberg press is developed, is invented, and Bibles start coming off the press, and people start reading the Bible on their own. And they start saying that, wait a minute, what this king is doing doesn't line up with the Bible. All right? So now you start to get into that age of Reformation, where they the Protestant church start to develop. The reason why they call it Protestant, we were protesting what the Pope was doing, because what he was doing wasn't biblical. All right? So now you have all these people in England. Even at that point, you still had the Church of England. At that point, church and state were combined. All right, the head of the state, the king, was also the head of the church. Right, but now what happened was you had a bunch of people started reading the Bible and started recognizing that, wait, what the king is doing doesn't line up with Bible. So they started developing their own sects, their own denominations. So you had basically two of them at that point. They called the Puritans in England, and the Puritans were people who wanted to make the Church of England pure. They didn't want to separate from the church, and then you had the Separatists. These were the ones who said the church is beyond repair. We need to start our own stuff at that point. So the Separatists basically, they were under persecution in England, so they needed to get away from there, so they ended up escaping England. Now again, this is one of the lies that we hear in this country. The Pilgrims didn't come here to escape religious persecution. They went to Holland first to escape religious persecution from England. And they settled in Holland for about 12 years. But then, as their children were growing up, they realized that Holland was too ungodly. They needed to find a place where they could raise their kids up in a Christian environment. So for that reason, they set out to come to the New World, where they could start, in their mind, a New Jerusalem, and start a whole colony, and they could have not be concerned about the worldly influences. So they set sail, and again, we're just summarizing it. They set sail, and they came here. They were chartered by, they had a charter to come to the land of Virginia. And their plan was to come and settle in the northern part of Virginia. But at that point, their real goal was the Hudson River. And somebody said, but I thought that we were supposed to go to Virginia. Well, back then, their charter, Virginia, the borders came all the way up to the Hudson River. Right, so that was part of Virginia at that point. So their charter was to come here and settle there. But because of bad weather and providence, they got knocked off course, and they ended up in Plymouth. And I think we talked about this in our other courses. They just happened to land in an area that didn't have any Indians that would kill them. because the area that they landed in, if you recall, we talked about the miracles, the tribe of Indians, the Pawtucket Indians, had lived there before, but they were wiped out by a plague. So the land, that area where they landed was cursed by the Indians. The Indians wouldn't go there because the previous tribes there were plagued, were demolished. So no Indians would go and settle there. But the reality is that was probably the only strip of land where the pilgrims could land and not get wiped out by the Indians. All right, that was safe. So they end up going there, but because they're not in their contracted area to where they had to go, now they're stuck without rules and regulations. But again, I don't want to miss anything. So let me just read the notes that I put here. The Mayflower Compact was a set of rules for self-governance established by the English settlers who traveled to the New World on the Mayflower. When Pilgrims and other settlers set out on the ship for America in 1620, they intended to lay anchor in northern Virginia. But after treacherous shoals and storms drove their ship off course, the settlers landed in Massachusetts instead, near Cape Cod, outside of Virginia's jurisdiction. Knowing life without laws could prove catastrophic, colonist leaders created Mayflower Compact to ensure a functioning social structure would prevail. Now, of the 102 passengers on the Mayflower, this is interesting, there were 50 men, 19 women, and 33 young adults and children. Just 41 were true pilgrims, religious separatists seeking freedom from the Church of England. The others were considered common folk and included merchants, craftsmen, indentured servants, and orphaned children. The pilgrims called them strangers. Seeking the right to worship as they wished, the Pilgrims had signed a contract with the Virginia Company to settle on land near the Hudson River, which was then part of Northern Virginia. The Virginia Company was a trading company chartered by King James I, with the goal of colonizing parts of the eastern coast of the New World. London stockholders financed the Pilgrim's voyage with the understanding that they'd be repaid in profits from the new settlement. But when the Mayflower landed in Massachusetts instead of Virginia, discord began before the colonists even left the ship. The strangers argued the Virginia Company contract was void. They felt since the Mayflower had landed outside of Virginia Company territory, they would no longer be bound by the company's charter. The defiant strangers refused to recognize any rules since there was no official government over them. Pilgrim leader William Bradford later wrote, quote, "Several strangers made discontented and mutinous speeches." The Pilgrims knew if something wasn't done quickly, it could be over for every man, woman, and family. Everyone would have to be out for themselves. So what was the Mayflower Compact? The Pilgrim leaders wanted to quell the rebellion before it took hold. After all, establishing a New World colony would be difficult enough without dissent in the ranks. The Pilgrims knew they needed as many productive, law-abiding souls as possible to make the colony successful. With that in mind, they set out to create a temporary set of laws for ruling themselves as per the majority agreement. On November 11, 1620, 41 adult male colonists, including 2 indentured servants, signed the Mayflower Compact, although it wasn't called that at the time. Who wrote the Mayflower Compact? It's unclear who wrote the compact, but the well-educated separatist and pastor William Brewster is usually given credit. One now famous colonist who signed the Mayflower Compact was Miles Standish. He was an English military officer hired by the Pilgrims to accompany them to the New World to serve as military leader for the colony. Standish played an important role in enforcing the laws and protecting colonists against unfriendly Native Americans. And what was the purpose of the Mayflower Compact? No one knows exactly what happened to the original Mayflower Compact. The accepted translation was found in William Bradford's Journal of Plymouth Plantation, in which he wrote about his experience as a colonist. The Mayflower Compact created laws for the Mayflower Pilgrims and non-pilgrims alike for the good of the new colony. It was a short document which established that, one, the colonists would remain loyal subject to King James despite their need for self-governance. The colonists would create and enact laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and offices for the good of the colony and abide by those laws. The colonists would create one society and work together to further it. The colonists would live in accordance with the Christian faith. Now, notice what it didn't say. It didn't say because some of them were separatists, some of them were common folk, some of them were indentured servant. You know what it didn't say? It didn't say that we celebrate our diversity. All right? It didn't say it. It said just the opposite. He said we come together as one. We serve one Christ, all right? This is the very roots of our unity in this nation and how far we've come across. A nation divided cannot stand. And even back then, they knew that. They knew that if they started breaking off into little groups and little things, it wouldn't happen. So they had to come together as one people. Even the pilgrims and even the strangers, even the godly and the ungodly, if they were going to live together in peace, they needed to have a common standard to rule and govern themselves. And what's really interesting about the Mayflower Compact is that, I don't know if I mentioned this here, but I'll just be redundant if I did, but this is the first time that a government was established by people coming together and finding mutual agreement. First time in world history. Before then, governments were imposed by the kings or by the dictators or by the ruling class. No time before that in world history has a government ever been established by people coming together and agreeing to govern themselves. This was the experiment in self-government. It started here with the Mayflower Compact. That's what's really significant about that. All right. Once the colonists agreed to work together, the hard work of starting the colony began. They elected John Carver governor on November 21st, 1620. Carver had helped secure financing for the Mayflower expedition and served in a leadership role during the voyage to America. He's also given credit for helping write the Mayflower Compact. Such search parties then went to shore to find an ideal place to settle. They decided on Plymouth, where the colonists endured a brutal winter. Ravaged by starvation, disease, and lack of shelter, more than half of the colonists died, yet Plymouth colony survived. It has been argued that the Mayflower Compact's role in cementing the colonists' dedication to each other and their mission was critical to their endurance that first winter. John Carver survived the hard winter of 1620, but died in April 1621, and the colonists chose William Bradford to replace him. Under his leadership, Plymouth colony started to thrive. As more and more settlers arrived and colonized the surrounding areas, a general court was established. Each town selected representatives to attend the court, thereby creating an early representative government. Why was the Mayflower Compact important? The Mayflower Compact was important because it was the first document to establish self-government in the New World. It remained active until 1691, when the Plymouth colony became part of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The Mayflower Compact was an early successful attempt at democracy and undoubtedly played a role in future colonists seeking permanent independence from British rule and shaping the nation that eventually became the United States of America. That's what's really significant about it. The first time in world history that people came together. Why? Because they knew the concept of covenant. Where did they get that concept from? The Bible. So they knew that the idea was they had to come together in covenant agreement with one another to establish laws for themselves. So when they came, the Mayflower Compact was basically a covenant agreement about them. All right? Yeah.
Is any of this taught in law school today?
Probably not. No.
Sad.
Okay. All right. Now, so I'm just going to go over briefly the text of the Mayflower Compact, but I want to bring your attention to one thing. The full text of the Mayflower Compact is as follows. In the name of God, listen to the way it begins. In the name of God, amen. We whose names are underwritten to the loyal subjects of our dread sovereign, Lord King James, by the grace of God of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, king and defender of the faith, etc., having undertaken, here's why they came to America, okay? They didn't come for religious freedom. Here's why they came. Having undertaken for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith and the honor of our king and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do by these presents, solemnly and mutually in the presence of God and one another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic for a better ordering and preservation and furtherance of the ends aforesaid, and by virtue hereof to enact, constitute, and frame and just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and offices from time to time, as shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. In witness whereof we have hereunto subscribed our names at Cape Cod the 11th November in the year of the reign of the sovereign Lord King James of England, France and Ireland the 18th, and Scotland the 54th, 1620 sources. Okay, but the key there is that they say we come together. Here's why we came. We came for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith. They saw the New World as a mission field. They were basically missionary explorers, like most of them were. They came to advance the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's when they came together to come to agreement on how we're going to order our lives, as we all agree. And that was the signing of the Mayflower Compact in the ship before they even set foot on land, because they knew that they were going to be in trouble, all right? So that's the Mayflower Compact, which is 1620. All right, so let's take a 5-minute break. What time is it now? We started at, what, 10? Oh, well, we're running early. We're running really early. All right, take a 5-minute break, and then we'll take session 2. There's coffee